Jester's position, I guess, in terms of the development and the perpetuation and preservation of the spiritual is unusual because of all the major arrangers, Johnson, his mentor, Dawson, um, let's see, Dett, John Work, Undine Moore, Harry T. Burley. I think Jester had unquestionably the longest commercial run because he was really a Hollywood arranger. All of those things he did for the Walter Schumann catalog really were things written more or less for the professional singers, and they used these things in the movies. He worked, I guess, after 35 when he took over for Hall Johnson. He worked in Hollywood for Dmitri Tiomkin, I mean, from 18 or 20 years. And so many of the arrangers have more or less only the college and the church aspect to their arranging. But you will find in his arrangements some purely commercial ones, some deeply moving ones, and I can't think of any of the other arrangers that did that but Hall Johnson. Hall Johnson has an arrangement of the St. Louis Blues where the voices imitate, the brass instruments. And Jester has some things like that. When I heard that you were going to do this, I sent away for all of the copies of his arrangements, a single copy of each of them from Bourne, his publisher, which also happens to be my publisher. And I just sat down at the piano and went through them one by one, and I found quite a few, that you would call definitely commercial arrangements. Then on the other hand, you have works like Wade in the Water that we're going to do on the concert on Saturday night. Uh, it's so deeply moving, that we're already planning to do it on some other concerts later this year. Yeah.
How did you first meet Jester? What, and are there? Well, let's first. When did you first meet Jester, and what were your impressions at the time?
Well, I had known him by reputation for years, but I didn't meet him until
So
1983.
let's start again. I didn't meet Jester. If you
Yes,
could put the name in.
sure. I did not meet Jester until 1983 when the ACDA, the American Choral Directors Association, honored him at their national convention in Nashville, Tennessee. I was for 7 years national chair of the ACDA Committee on Ethnic Music, and it was my committee that sponsored the session at which Jester was honored. So we had the concert choir from Ole Miss and the concert choir from Kentucky State University. They performed a program of Jester's music, and then they combined at the end under his direction. And I think there were 3,000 choral directors there, and not a dry eye in the house when it was all over. People went back to the days when, of course, Ole Miss was totally unintegrated, and of course, Kentucky State was, at least that choir was completely black. So it was a sort of moving gesture, and it was sort of signified the thing that Jester does so well. He has been as much an ambassador for goodwill as he's been an arranger and an actor. Wherever he goes, he's loved.
That's great.
Good stuff.
That's great. Let's explore a little bit more what Jester's music does to people and the spiritual in general, but
Right.
specifically Jester's.
Well, let's take a piece like Amen. That became world famous because of the movie Lilies in the Field with Sidney Poitier. Uh, and of course, it wasn't Poitier singing, it was just a Harrison singing. Amen. You know. And somehow he has the ability to write music that is technically within the grasp of a good high school choir. So consequently, it's accessible. Say his mentor, Hall Johnson, um, didn't limit himself. For example, Jester's Elijah Rock is in 5 parts. Elijah Rock, shout, shout, Elijah. You can get all the essence and flavor of that spiritual in that arrangement, and it's completely within the reach of a good high school group. But Hall Johnson's Elijah Rock is in 13 parts. We did it on our Carnegie Hall concert in 1992. But you rarely do it because it takes such a tremendous group of singers. I mean, it takes, we used a choir of about 120 voices for that performance. And it was thrilling. But through the years, I would dare say that since I recorded uh, that work of Hall Johnson's on an album in 1969, I'll bet I haven't heard it performed more than a couple of times because of its difficulty. And the Jester's accessibility is the thing that makes him so loved and so frequently performed. I just wish I got his royalty checks from it.
Let's explore.
We did have a choir under that.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah. But it's a little bit of flavor.
Sure.
Was it real prominent?
No.
Okay.
It's
It's on the automatic recording. I can't do anything about it. Let's explore. Help an uninitiated person understand who Hall Johnson was
Right.
and what influence he had on Jester.
Sure. Well, Hall Johnson was a professional violinist. His father actually was a college president of Allen University in South Carolina. And Hall was born in 1888 and very well educated. He went to University of Pennsylvania. He did some graduate work in languages at the University of California. And he used to play in the Meyer 11 Society Band. And then he organized a string quartet, professional string quartet. But his mainstay was the playing in the society band. And this was a time when there were a lot of musicals on the New York stage that featured black. Some of them, I cannot think of all of those artists. But Hall Johnson soon began to see the spiritual and music derived from the spiritual jazzed up in a way that upset him. So never one to fail to accept the challenge. He got together 7 or 8 singers, the original Hall Johnson singers in New York City. They started regular rehearsals, and within 2 years' time, they gave a formal concert in Town Hall, and got good reviews, and the Hall Johnson Singers was born. And his attention sort of shifted from violin playing to working with this group, which of course became larger because he wrote several musicals which actually were successful on Broadway. One was Run Little Chillin', that was on Broadway in the heart of the Depression, ran for 90 days. Another, as we said, was The Green Pastures, which they were in Hollywood to film when Jester took over the group from Hall Johnson. So I have at our college the memorabilia from the Hall Johnson estate, and there's some old programs from those Broadway shows. So he had a large choir for the Run Little Chillin', because those were the WPA days when you could actually get a group of singers and the government would pay them to rehearse and to sing. It would pay the artists to paint murals. So this Hall's significance is hard to overestimate. He had an announced objective to develop and to preserve the essential qualities of the Afro-American spiritual. And I think his arrangements, um, are some of the finest. I would say, if you look on albums by people like Leontine Price, you'll find many. She has an album of spirituals. She does many of Hall's. Marian Anderson did a complete album of Hall Johnson spirituals. Um, his choir became so famous that the State Department selected it in the early 1950s to represent America at the International Cultural Festival in Berlin. And of course, before that, he had made dozens of movies in Hollywood. There are 3 or 4 of the Shirley Temple movies that are still available, and the Hall Johnson Choir provides the music. I have, as one of my objectives, to try to collect all the existing videos that feature his choir doing the background music. But both in solo arrangements and in choral arrangements, he provided a large repertoire of authentic spirituals where he utilized the most advanced compositional techniques, but at the same time kept the basic essence of the spiritual. The best way, of course, to demonstrate this is to listen to them, but that's his real significance. And the further significance is that he always attempted to help younger artists. So if I think of the people who have studied with him and who've been helped by him, I think immediately of Jester, who was the very first, and then Leonard DePaul, who started the famous DePaul Infantry Chorus, and in his later years was Director of Community Relations at Lincoln Center. John Motley, who was music director for the city of New York and directed the All-City Chorus there, and was also a fine pianist and accompanying Marian Anderson in the album of Hall Johnson's works. And then he coached many, many major artists in his works. I have a letter from Shirley Verrett, who of course was a famous mezzo-soprano of the Metropolitan Opera, where he had coached her in the performance of some of his works. And it was a simple and humble note saying, "Gee, thanks for all you've done for me." So Hall Johnson's influence was so great because he helped so many people carry on this work. And I mean, as a relative youngster, I guess I was in my late 20s when I first met him. The first thing I did was see how many of his works I could learn. I was singing then in New York, so I not only learned to sing them, but then I teach them to my own students. Both black and white. One of my students who just made her debut at the Metropolitan Opera last week, a young mezzo-soprano named Barbara Dever, sings these works just superbly. If you were to put her behind the screen, you would never know that she's white and Irish. You'd think this was a black, she may be Betty Allen or someone singing this, Or there's another mezzo-soprano that just came out with a CD. She lives in Philadelphia. Her name escapes me at the moment. But Hall's contribution was probably different than any other, because not only did he leave the great body of works, but he made an effort to develop younger artists and to present them. You will find many concerts, artists that have been presented by the Hall Johnson Choir. Robert McFerrin, who was the first black baritone at the Met, was frequently sponsored in concerts by Hall Johnson's choir. So that's the significance of his work and his life, I guess.
What kind of...
Well, Jester to me is unique because he has this whole Renaissance man scope. I think when I introduced him at the ACDA convention, I said he was um, choral director, singer, arranger, composer, actor, ambassador, all of which he has been and all of which he has done in a superb fashion. And that's really that's so different of the typical arranger. I mean, I know so many of them, and well, um, many of them will perform their works, but many of them don't relate the way that he does to church choirs and the school choirs, because he just has that personality thing, you know. He goes in and choirs love him and work with him and assimilate what he's trying to teach them. And but he seems to do it all with a sleight of hand, you know, just as if it's easy. I have described him to my friends because they all have seen Amen, you know, and they all know Raleigh, but they would never have thought of him as a well-known, you know, arranger and composer. They would have just thought of him as a character actor, you know. And no, I find it's just utterly fantastic that he can take off one hat and put on another, you know, so quickly.
Let's cover again. Maybe if it's different, and if it's not, we'll move on to other things. Again, his impact to people. How does he and his music affect people?
Well, you know, it's he has actually been sent because of this ability to affect the lives of people and to show the joy in music. He's been sent by the State Department as ambassador to other countries. Um, you know, I don't even know, how do you establish a reputation that makes this possible? You know, the State Department is saying, "Oh, well, gee, we need to send someone to Zambia, you know, to improve the cultural climate." So, well, send Jester, you know. They wouldn't think of anyone else. And this can only be, I guess, because he's done it so much in the United States. I've, on rare occasions, had opportunities to, well, I once went into a community in North Carolina where there had been considerable racial unrest, and they had a wonderful community chorus there, and we chose a program of works that would tend to improve relations and bring people closer together, and put it together over several days and gave a big concert. But apparently, he's been able to do that throughout the United States and beyond our borders. And I can't frankly think of any other arrangers of that sort that have developed that kind of reputation. You've got to meet the composers where they'll tell you about their works. But I don't know. Jester's personality just sort of goes across the floodlights. Everybody said, "Don't you just love that guy?" You know.
This is great. This is great. This is very, very nice. And again, in an encompassing statement, how the influence Hall Johnson had on Jester. Let's cover that.
Right. I think basically Hall Johnson's influence on Jester was similar to what it has been on other disciples or mentees of Hall Johnson's. First, he encouraged him. Obviously, if you look at that very first act, allowing Jester to take over his group, generally, if I become ill, I get a chance to name the person who's going to come in and take over my work. And that indicated that there was a real relationship between the two of them. And it's a relationship that endured for many, many years on a friendly basis. So the first influence, I guess, that Hall Johnson had was to encourage him to move career-wise into this line of work, choral arranging and conducting for movies and for television. And then I think out of that, probably the other things grew. If you're working around movies and television all the time, somebody says, Jester, we need somebody, to play this character role. Well, I'll try anything once. But I think sort of his whole career sort of grew out of that work with the media, and then I guess from that it came over into the educational field, and then beyond that almost into the diplomatic field, where he's doing this not only in the States but beyond that. Uh, so it's just that I guess when someone assists you, as Hall Johnson did, what actually becomes of you depends on what your basic talents are. McFerrin's strength was as a singer, so he ends up as the first black male singing in the Metropolitan Opera. There were many other singers, Shirley Verrett, and Leontine Price, and Marian Anderson, uh, whose careers went in different ways. But I really think that first push, yeah, if you just think about the fact that after this experience, uh, he was for 18 or 19 years with one major producer, Dmitri Tiomkin. I mean, obviously he had to be pretty well established after that.
Sum up Jester in one statement. Dr. Otley said he's like a leprechaun, he's like a black leprechaun.
Mm-hmm.
He says that's how I've described him before. And then how would you sum up? How would you describe Jester?
Well, I think that probably there's a book called The Joy in Music, and that's sort of the way I see his life. I see him emanating. I would stop this a minute because I got a tickle. A little more.
Possible again. We're trying to summarize in a brief statement describing Jester.
Right. If I had to summarize Jester's life and work in a single statement, I think he has shown thousands, if not millions, of people that music is love, because I think the thing that he expresses most through his workshops and clinics and through his music itself, the two elements, love and joy, whether it's a calypso tune or whether it's a very serious spiritual or a lullaby. I've done so many different kinds of things, but they all have a happiness. If you look at the things that we're doing on the program here, something like Going Down That Lonesome Road, you might think it's a sad song, but by the time he finishes with it, with the finger snapping and the whistling and the women and the boo be da da boo, it becomes a joyous thing. So I sort of see in his music and his life what Bernstein was trying to do in his Joy in Music, which I think was the name of one of his books. What Diane Bish is trying to do. She has a television series, organ from Coral Gables and other playing great organs around the world of joy and music. So I think Jester is another one of those unique individuals whose whole life has just demonstrated that, the joy in music. And I think his personal love for it is emanated in such a way that the people who come in contact with it share at least a portion of that.
That's nice. In fact, let's do that last part again.
Mm-hmm.
Jester is the love of music, and then that last statement.
Right. Um, as I was saying, Bish, Bernstein, they have all tried to live their lives in such a way as to show the people that they come in contact with the joy in music. So their love of the art is translated to those for whom they perform, uh, to those whom they teach. And I feel that in everything Jester does, there is this love. And he has the great ability to communicate this to those who come in contact with him.
This is so beautiful. I want to be able, if I use it as a step, saying, be able to communicate this, say this love of music.
Right.
If you could.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Let's start again.
Mhm.
Ready?
And I think the most significant thing is that all those who come in contact with him, he is able to communicate to them his own love of music and his own joy in music. I hope that this is something that I can capture and do in my own work.